Okay, we have started the meeting 10 minutes earlier, so that way we're giving much more of an opportunity for people to join if they have technical issues. Hi, Juliana. Hi, Astrid.
Hello, how are you?
Good,
Can you hear me
thank
now?
you.
Good morning.
Yes,
Good
I
morning,
can.
Astrid. Good to see you.
Okay, so I should be able to, yeah, good morning.
And you're spotlighted, so we should see you when you're speaking.
Okay, Nachiba, will you let me know when we are starting?
Yes, probably we give it just 1 or 2 minutes so that people are able to join, as I do understand that, technical could always be an issue. So if it's okay, we'll wait for 2 minutes and then we are able to start.
Yeah. I've just lost my picture. Oh no, see, sorry. So you can hear me all right?
Yep.
And keep your phone on, Astrid. I'll be texting you and Najiba too.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't take the clothes away in the background.
That's okay. You're at home.
Let me see if I can do that. No, I can't. Okay, maybe we should start as it
Okay.
is recording as well, and people can join as well. We have started.
As we're going.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone then. I know it's across the world, it's morning or afternoon. We're here at 2:30 in the morning in Australia. We're calling in from Australia, as I said, from Settlement Services International, and we have put on this parallel event. I'm Astrid Perry, and I will bring you through the first half of the meeting. And I'm here with Nachiba and Juliana, who I will introduce a little bit more later. As it is custom in Australia, I will acknowledge country first for any official event. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, in my case, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who have cared for this land since time immemorial. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and commit ourselves to a future with reconciliation and renewal at its heart. And I would like to extend that to all the Indigenous people across the world. Thank you. In Australia, we use this acknowledgement to acknowledge our Indigenous people who are still the rightful owners of this land, and this will always be and is Aboriginal land. Thank you. Settlement Services International is a large settlement organization that works with migrants and refugees for all sorts of purposes, to settle them, to have children in foster care, work with people with disability, have employment services, that kind of thing. We have a very strong interest in women and girls, and in fact we have a women's strategic plan for our organization, even though it works with all people, because it is that important to us. I want to tell you a little bit about our parallel event. Australia, for those who don't know, is a migrant with a high level of density of a country with a high level of density of migrants and refugees. So about 29% of our population is born overseas, and in some suburbs of the biggest cities like Melbourne and Sydney, some suburbs have 60% of people who are born overseas in a non-English speaking country. So this is very close to our heart because we're an organization that supports the people to settle. And like many other countries, or most countries, we have a lack of women from migrant and refugee background in higher office and in the public arena. Women have it hard. They reach a glass ceiling, as we know, but there's also a cultural glass ceiling for women. And so we wanted to, in light of the topic this year of CSW, we want to examine the obstacles and enablers by interviewing 4 women and find out a little bit more what their situation was in order to get to the position that they are in. So we have 3 politicians, federal, state, and local government, and we have 1 businesswoman who also, of course, operates at that public level. And we have our panel of Juliana, Nachiba, and myself, and we will look at the different themes that come out from those interviews. Those interviews are filmed, and so we let you participate that way, as at the moment people will be fast asleep in Australia at 2:30 in the morning. But first, let us watch the address from our CEO, Violet Rumiliotis, who is very interested, as you can hear from my coverage of SSI, in supporting women and girls. Violet is the holder of the Telstra Business Award, so she was Woman of the Year, and many other accolades. And she has been at the helm of the organization for the past 11 years. And as you can hear yourself, is an amazing advocate. Thank you, Nachiba. If you could let the film run now, thank you. Okay, we've got the film here. I'll see whether I can activate it.
Can you hear the film?
No, not me. It's just sitting there. It's not running yet.
Okay.
It's coming.
Yes.
Last year's CSW session was interrupted by the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic.
You can hear
This year's session of the Commission on the Status of Women will explore women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life. Last year's CSW session was interrupted by the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic, and much has changed in the past year for women. As CSW Chair Maher Magarian said in his message ahead of this year's session, women are facing a shadow pandemic that is rolling back progress on gender equality. In Australia, we've seen that play out in 40% increase in domestic and family violence during lockdown. Since the pandemic began, the average Australian woman has also done 1 extra hour of unpaid work per day than her partner. And women are also suffering economically. The rate of COVID-related job losses for women is double that of men. Women are also less likely to get government support because Australia's salary subsidy program excluded short-term casuals who are mostly women. Settlement Services International is a community-based social business that supports newcomers and other vulnerable Australians to achieve their full potential. Our work aims to identify and amplify the strengths of women, particularly migrant and refugee women, to support them to achieve their social and economic aspirations. And we do this through our service delivery, capacity building, and advocacy. A good example of that is our Women's and Girls Plan, which was launched earlier this month. And this plan recognises that SSI works with many talented women who could benefit from targeted strategies and interventions so that they too can achieve their aspirations. It encompasses women of all backgrounds, including transgender women and people who identify as non-binary and other diverse genders. SSI also progresses gender equality through our international protection and engagement, including by participating in the CSW sessions each year. Forums like the CSW enable SSI to elevate the voices of migrant and refugee women we support, including by sponsoring young women to participate in person at CSW prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. Today's event is focused on paving the path for minority women to move into leadership roles. This is important to me because I didn't have a typical leadership pathway myself into the CEO role of one of the largest not-for-profits in Australia. I went to public schools with my sisters. We grew up in Western Sydney, and our weekends were spent working in our parents' corner store. I'm a second-generation Australian of Greek background, and I share my story of my family openly, their trials and tribulations, the good and bad, to show and showcase the importance of being true to yourself and your background and looking at the strengths as well as the challenges and really having aspirations and dreams that will get you to where you want to be. I wish you all the best today in your deliberations.
A lovely opening there from Violet, and we're having a few more people joining now. So please use the chat function in the Zoom meeting if you want to ask us any questions or make any comments. I now have the pleasure of introducing Nachiba, who will talk to us about our pre-event that we held to hear the voices of young migrant and refugee women. But I'll tell you a little bit more about Nachiba first. Nachiba Vasefadost is a former refugee from Afghanistan who has graduated with a BA from medical science. Nachiba is the founder of Global Refugee Network and the Asia Pacific Network of Refugees. She has been actively involved in the development of refugee-led networks at both the regional and global level, which focuses on bringing together refugee and migrant-led organizations and refugee change makers from around the world. Nachiba prioritizes and amplifies the voices, experiences, and aspirations of those most directly impacted. She has been a gender auditor to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to ensure gender equality and empowerment of refugee and migrant women remains a top priority commitment. Over to you, Nachiba.
Thank you very much, Astrid. I also would like to use this opportunity and welcome all the participants to our parallel event. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about, the achievements of women that have made to Australia, but also, together and collectively to the world. As you just heard from our CEO, Violet, SSI is a long-standing advocate for women's rights and gender equality in Australia, and consequently engages on these issues, not only on a national level, but also on regional and international level. One of the ways on which we have been doing this is that we undertook a national virtual pre-CSW conversation for grassroots women from migrant and refugee backgrounds around the UN Women theme for CSW 65 just last month. The reason we actually hold this consultation or the national conversation on CSW is to ensure that we were going to come to this parallel event, with the voices of those that have been affected, with the voices of those that have been the leaders when we talk about public life participation. We wanted to make sure that, women are being consulted at national level and at the same time have been given an opportunity, to amplify their voices at such important international platform like CSW. So in our event, we actually brought together a diverse group of women from across Australia to introduce the theme of CSW. And at the same time, we were able to gather ideas around, barriers to and strategies to accessing role in public life. It was clearly voiced out throughout the event that refugee and migrant women and girls are underrepresented in positions of leadership, and their participation in public life at local, national, and global level continues to be limited. And it was clearly voiced again that it was not well documented as well. For example, women are still too often excluded from peace negotiations, peace building, or conflict resolution discussions. Most often, women's voices and influence are constrained as a result of discriminatory social structures, and we talk about patriarchy and gender hierarchies that begin at a household level and flow on how women and girls are able to fully and actively organize, engage, and speak in public life. The majority of participants felt that, gender inclusion is still a faraway goal. They still felt that their voices are not heard effectively. Refugee and migrant women felt that they remain underrepresented in organizations that do not focus on gender issues and are really disadvantaged by unequal access to resources that really needed them to become effective leaders. A lot of them told us that how they have still lack of knowledge and lack of access. Sometimes they don't really know where and how to engage. And I think that was, and at the same time, not having access to information, in a timely manner. So there were also not only that we were able to discuss around these barriers, or for example, many women were talking about how they're facing discrimination and racism from the wider community, and this has increased even due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We even heard about, what do we mean by the definition of a shared space? It's not clear. What table do we even sit in, and where are we considered? So these were some of the challenges and barriers that women actually shared with us during the pre-event as we were preparing towards this parallel event. But at the same time, we were actually given some strategies and recommendations as to how we could combat some of these challenges. In order to promote the full and active participation of refugee and migrant women and girls in all their diversity, greater support must be given to refugee and migrant women's leadership opportunities to really enhance their presentation and decision-making at all levels, and to actively break down barriers to participation. This really, and what women and young women who attended the event, they emphasized that this really requires investing resources in education, skills development, and mentorship of women and girls to realize their full potentials, and as leaders. It also requires the supported inclusion of women and girls in the planning, design, and implementation of programs and policy. This includes actively increasing and investing in women's participation in conflict prevention, in peace building, and conflict resolution processes, such as outlined in the Women, Peace and Security agenda. A strong emphasis, was made that we need to raise awareness a young age for girls around gender equity and start building confidence in our young girls and enabling them to participate in decision making. For a lot of the participants, it was quite important to also support women engagement through social network, having access to information and building confidence, which was continuously mentioned throughout the event. It was about creating safe listening space for women to speak and experience, considering the intersectionality, avoiding patronizing language. We give you a voice, need for appropriate spaces. Overall, we think that this CSW space that's happening right now, have been happening for the past 2 weeks, is definitely an important platform where we look into the international leaders and stakeholders to look for ways to facilitate access for refugee and migrant women to have influence on decision-making and intent for organizations to be exposed to greater diversity. For it is this diversity that gives us this opportunity to listen and learn from other people with different perspectives and knowledge, to share views and expertise and enhance richer and more considered decisions. And my last point is that in order to empower, refugee and migrant women participate, to influence, and especially to encourage women to participate in enriching conversations or debate on the matters that matters most to them, anyone, any organization or stakeholders or government or civil society must enhance its understanding by taking a diversity sensitive approach. And this approach must be embedded into the strategy via targeted programming, as well as secure funding is to ensure sustainability. So I would like to encourage all our participants today to go and look at the uploaded file. We have already uploaded the full report on our national pre-CSW conversation with grassroots women, which will really detail out more around barriers and strategies, and it will be a very good reading material. Once again, thank you so much, Astrid, for giving me the time, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Nachiba. Great overview, and also a very enthusiastic support for everyone to look at advancing young women into public life, and those that are of migrant background in your countries, particularly. We need that support, and those women need your support. I'd now like to introduce Juliana Nkrumah. Juliana is a long-term advocate for women and girls. She led FGM, female genital mutilation, I'm sure as everyone knows, work in Australia for over 10 years. She has received many accolades, including the CEST Award and being the winner of the prestigious Women of the West Award. Juliana's work is very much in the multicultural space and has been so for years, having managed multicultural community liaison officers for the police, headed a refugee unit in government, and is now working in the domestic violence field as a project manager. Juliana was born in Ghana and arrived in Australia as a young adult. She has been a participant at CSW and its other forums many times, and she also attended the 1995 Beijing conference. Juliana certainly is a woman's advocate through and through. Juliana will now lead us into the sort of moderated panel and also our viewings of the interviews. Thank you, Juliana.
Thank you very much, Astrid. And so far, thank you so much that we have had a wonderful panel. We are going to have a more wonderful time from here to the end. So thank you, everybody who has joined us. We look forward to a good time. Now, listen, we have conducted interviews with parliamentarians and a businesswoman. The reason why we bring in them recorded is because it's 2:53 in Australia now AM, and a lot of the participants would be in bed. But these interviewees have been totally generous with their time in recording their interviews. I would need Najiba's help for us to be able to bring the interviews to you. Our first interviewee is MP Maria Vanvakino, who is a federal parliamentarian. Maria is the first Greek-born woman to be elected into parliament in Australia. She's born on the island of Lefkada in Greece. Maria migrated to Australia with her family in 1963. Maria was elected to the federal parliament with the Australian Labor Party in the division of Cornwall in 2001 and has been an MP for this electorate for the 8 consecutive terms. So she's an old hand at this job. In December 2002, the Year of Women of Greek Diaspora, the Greek government recognized and awarded a medal for her achievement for success in her chosen field. Maria is a deputy chair of the Joint Standing Committee on Migration and has been a member of this committee since 2010. She is also a member of the Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defense and Trade, and is a member of the Subcommittee for Human Rights and Foreign Affairs and Aid. Maria is a qualified teacher and has a keen interest in education, arts, science, and innovation. Let us hear from Maria now. Thanks, Najiba.
Minister Maria, you have served Julie, on federal government, which was probably Minister Maria. You have served.
You might want to open it again, yeah?
Could you hear that or no?
Just the beginning, but it got stuck, I think. Oh, that might be better.
I'm just reopening it again.
Oh, yeah.
Minister Maria, you have served on federal government, which was probably your entry into public life, and you're now, being a longer server in the government. We are very keen to hear from you about your experiences and messages that you might have, for women and young women. And with that, I would like to ask you, what made you enter public life? Is there a particular experience or incident that inspired or challenged you to consider a role in public life?
Well, firstly, I was a young student growing up in Australia in the 70s. I was at high school. I was always interested in politics and I was studying politics. And in 1975, when I was in year 11 studying politics, 1975 was a very critical year for Australian politics. It was the year that the Australian Prime Minister was sacked by our Governor General. The 70s were a very politically exciting time, and it was a decade of great reform. The Australian Labor Party embraced migrant communities through commitments to policies in multiculturalism. It realised that the migrants that had come to Australia had an incredible contribution to make, and that contribution needed to be recognised. Their efforts needed to be recognised. They came here to help build our nation, but they also brought with them a wealth of cultural inheritance, their faith and their their, even their food, as you will be very familiar with the growth of the incredible food industry in Australia. And the Labor Party in particular realised that this was an important resource for Australia, that we were a multicultural country, a country that has an Indigenous past, with our first people being the oldest continuous culture on the planet, literally. And they set about devising a framework for multiculturalism. That is what attracted me, and that is what excited me about being politically active when I realised that as a young migrant, I came here when I was 4, I had an opportunity to shape the future of this country. And of course, I was outraged, like everybody else was, about the sacking of the Prime Minister. And that sparked a little fire, I guess, in me to stand up and to believe that I can make a difference. And I was given the opportunity to do so.
Sure, fantastic. So what were some of the barriers that you faced, and what are some of the challenges women from marginalised communities could face, from your opinion, Minister Maria?
I think growing up in Australia, the obvious, as I look back now, it's the expectation that the community that you're in, the mainstream community, has of you, in this case me and my generation, who were children of migrants. So it became, the expectation could have become a barrier, the expectation not only of the dominant culture, which then leads into stereotyping of people from different backgrounds, but also the expectations of our own families and our own cultural upbringing did become a barrier for many of us. And that could, in many ways, be the factor that determines our confidence to be able to believe that we can do something different and be something different to what might be expected of us. And that's the beginning. And in my case, my mother was an uneducated woman from rural Greece, but she came to Australia with my dad and our generation for the purposes of educating her daughters. And she was a driving force in making sure that, yes, she wanted me to grow up to be a Greek girl as she understood it, but she also wanted me to have opportunity, my sister and I. And she made sure that there was a balance in our house between doing what was expected of us as girls, but also being given the opportunity and the time to get an education. She herself was very interested in the community. She may have been an activist if she had the opportunity. She may have been a politician, I don't know. But the truth is that she shaped my confidence and encouraged me to be involved, to be concerned about what was going on and to do something about it. So in a way, the expectations and the stereotyping can be a problem, but if we have the support required around us, we can actually go beyond that. Yeah.
So I think it's that support and the continuous leadership, in your domestic life from your mother has helped you, to combat some of those earlier barriers as a young woman. I can hear.
And not to be constrained not to be thwarted and constrained by stereotypes either. We had to fight. My generation had to fight for its place. We had to fight for our place in the broader community. And we did that. And we did that because we were growing up in Australia. The 70s was an incredible period, and multiculturalism actually gave us a hand to assist us in fighting for our place, to fight against the stereotyping and to fight against expectations of stereotyping. And that's how important those sorts of public policies are in assisting and supporting the community, and especially people or women in particular that have additional barriers put in their way as a result of their life circumstances.
One of the 12 critical areas of Beijing Platform for Action is institutional mechanism for advancement of women. And again, we really would like to hear, in your opinion, what public policies or structural decisions have been enablers for you to enter the public life. Is there any specific examples that you would like to share?
Very specific. I mean, I was interested in politics from a young age. I didn't become officially involved with the Labor Party as a member until, maybe 1982, which would have been about 5 or 6 years later. In my case, I was involved in my party at a time when the party was having discussions about increasing the number of women in Parliament. And it was a big battle that the women had in the party, because we wanted affirmative action, because we knew that an affirmative action or a quota, was the only way that we were going to be able to smash those barriers. There was no other way. Everyone agreed that we had to have more women in Parliament. No one disagreed with that, but we were never going to get there without an affirmative action policy. And we adopted affirmative action policy. We set ourselves targets, a certain number of percentage of women by certain periods of time. And I was in that first, in those first targets of 1/3 by, I've forgotten the year now, but in any case, it's a long time ago. So it made it easier for me, who was already active in the party, and I spent a lot of my time assisting the non-English speaking members of our party, getting them involved and making sure that they understood the empowerment of being involved. And the opportunity was there. I was a woman of migrant background. I was a woman, and I was also of migrant background, and it was the timing for me. And I still had to go through pre-selection and elections and things, and it was a male that I had to stand against. But in the end, I and a whole series of other women at that time were successful, and our party today has reached its 50% plus target. And you'll be aware that the government party has finally agreed or realised that their only solution to getting more women on their side of politics, on the Conservative side, is to actually set quotas. And that's a big change in the attitude towards quotas.
Sure. You've just heard you speaking, about enablers, barriers, and policies. I was wondering how are some of these different, from the country that you have grew up? So Greece. Would it be much more challenging?
I left Greece when I was 4 years old. So I grew up in Australia. However, I have kept a strong interest in what goes on in other countries in relation to women's issues. And with Greek society was a patriarchal society, like any other. When in the early 80s, the socialist government of PASOK, and it takes, I'm going to refer to this because it takes it takes a political party in government to make change. They became the government, and they immediately set around about introducing legislation to, for example, outlaw the dowry, legislation that allowed women to keep their own surnames upon getting married. And not only that, but also, for example, to give their own children their surnames. So their affirmative action policies that went into law changed on the legislative framework around the rights of women. So the country that I was born in but didn't grow up in is a good example of progressive political parties understanding the need for change, reforming legislative frameworks that actually almost make it law for women to be, in this instance, women, to have equal rights as men. And that challenge continues. It's something that we will never say, we can never say that we have won the war until every woman on this planet lives in a country where her rights are equal to her male counterparts, and there's no possibility of discrimination, and that battle is still going. So we win it in some places, but we've got to fight for the women in other places.
Sure, couldn't agree more. Probably my last question to you, Minister Maria, is that, you spoke a little bit around, your own challenges as a young woman, and you grew up and be, a successful politician today. What advice would you give to young migrant and refugee women who would like to enter the public life? Do you have a message to the next generation of women from actually diverse communities who are marginalized?
I do, and my message is very simple. Never lose the belief and the confidence that you can make a difference, that public life is not something that can be aspired to only by certain types of people, that all of us can aspire to public life. If we find a pathway of opportunity to enter public life, we should do so. We shouldn't be discouraged. I think young women today carry the baton for the next generation of leadership for women, and I think that theirs is a responsibility to be interested, to be determined, to have the confidence, to have the courage to believe that they can make a difference. Because if the women in our community don't believe in themselves, then we will never get to a stage where enough women are sitting in positions of power and influence so that they can change things for the benefit of the community. Women at a community level, we're all very confident to go and be involved in organisations and to do things, but there's something, but going into public office is not as unreachable as people think, as women would think. And I want to encourage young women not to be distracted, not to be turned away by a political process that at a given time may look, awful. At the moment, the debate around, the sexual harassment of women in Parliament it's an awful time, and a lot of people and a lot of young women are thinking, oh my goodness, I don't want to be involved there.
That's right.
That's part and parcel of a system that needs to be changed. And if you want to change things, you have to be involved. You have to be interested. And as I say to my primary school children when they ask me, why did you become a politician? I say, I think it's because I didn't mind my own business. I never minded my own business. I was interested in what everybody else was doing and how I could be involved. So don't mind your own business in a positive way, and give your talent and your capacity to changing the community around you and to shaping the future of the country that you live in.
Well, thank you.
Wonderful.
That was amazing. Thank you very much. Now our panel, Astrid and Najiba, I would like you to bring us some reflection on what Maria talked about. She had a lot to say. So can we start with Astrid?
Yeah. Look, the two things that really stuck out for me, one of them is affirmative action. it was always a really important position for me and standpoint to actually look at structures and systems systematically, what effect this is having, and then actually counteract it proactively. So the quota is a good example of affirmative action. I know quotas are detested, you know, there's a lot of debate around quotas, but it actually does make a difference. Even if you just set targets, which is not that much different to quotas, then you work proactively towards it. And that's what we've seen in the early years in Australia. And we must fight not to lose some of that direction. So that for me was a very strong message. Thank you.
Thanks, Astrid. I'll come back to you with a question. Najiba, can I ask you for your reflection?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's very similar to what we heard from some women in our CWS event. I think confidence is something that's keep coming up. I think it's quite important how we could support and encourage women, to build confidence. And I think when we talk about leadership, it's a process, it's a journey that really starts from an early young age. And I think, for Minister Maria, she was resettled in a country with full of opportunities where she had access to education. And I think, again, the investment, in resources and educating women is quite important when we talk about leadership and participation, especially in terms of marginalized women. And for me, I think that's a key highlight, and how our programs and activities, and institutions can actually invest more in supporting education for young women who are actually wanting to enter into public life.
Thank you to the two of you. I think for me, a whole lot of things resonated with me, but one thing she said, that, as she said, Najiba, was also voiced by the people who attended our CSW, pre-CSW event, was the message about don't look at yourself as one who is not made for public life. And I think one woman clearly articulated in our event that if she looked around at the people who were in public life, in leadership, she didn't know what nobody looked like her. And what Maria is saying is, it's okay if nobody looks like you today, but it does not stop you from aspiring to be there. And the lovely thing that I think she said was what she says to the children in school. I got there because I did not mind my own business. And I think that is the core of getting into public life, is to be able to make everybody's business your business. So that's my reflection. But I want to go back to a question for you, Astrid, because I know that you are a champion of young women. In our organization in SSI, you have championed the voices of young women and the active participation of young women in decision-making, especially the fact that for 3 consecutive CSWs, you made sure SSI supported a young woman to attend CSW. And in fact, we've seen the outcome of what that has done for some young women who attended. Astrid, could you tell me, what do you think today's young people think about the fight, the battle that Maria referred to?
What she referred to?
The fight, because Maria kept saying we had to fight. So what do you think about young women today? What are they fighting for? Do they understand the need to fight, or have they taken for granted what has been won for them?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of both. And of course, we can't speak for all young women. We certainly at SSI have some very, very engaged young women. But of course, the history that we went through is often not known and not felt. So many things are being taken for granted. But when there's an upheaval, like at the moment, the sexual harassment debate, we can see how young women are coming forward and making very strong you know, contribution to say this is not on, this is not what we have signed up for, and they have had much more influence also in their schools. I think we see young people marching, we see young people using social media very effectively. They have different ways of organizing now as well, and you know, you can get thousands and thousands getting really strongly involved and swaying politics, swaying you know, public policy in very different ways. So I'm hopeful for the future, because I think I see a lot of talented young women that are well and truly on their path. But I also think that we have to look at ourselves and also be able to foster young women. They're the next generation. And when I, you know, become less active, I want to be sure that there's a generation there that can take up the baton. As Maria was saying, I want to feel confident that I've done my bit, and the next bit is well and truly enthusiastic, going forward with much strength, and really that's what I want to see. Yeah.
Thank you, Astrid. I think you will see that, because you have really made an effort in, and we appreciate you for the effort that you've made in that area. Najiba, could you please help me with the next interview? In the meantime, I will introduce Giselle. Giselle Resende is a senior international education executive with over 15 years global experience in the English, higher education, and vocational sectors. From leading the global teams to creating and implementing innovative business development strategies, Giselle's breadth of experience across all sectors.
So as a businesswoman, you are also very much.
Thank you. I'll just finish Giselle's bio, will I? So
Yeah,
in addition to her 15 years of professional experience, Giselle is the embodiment of an Australian international student success story, having arrived in Australia from Brazil 24 years ago to study English. Her career trajectory demonstrates the life-changing influence education can have on someone's personal and professional life. Let's welcome the interview with Astrid and Giselle. Thank you.
So as a businesswoman, you are also very much in the public life, either because you're fronting the organization or you're negotiating and advocating with politicians and governments. So is that something that you were always interested in your own country as well?
I wouldn't say I was always interested, but I think that comes a little bit from my upbringing. I come from a family that my mother always worked. She always had her business. I am the only daughter, and I'm the youngest of two boys. I'm the only granddaughter, and I'm the youngest of all the boys. So I had to grow up in an environment that I was always fighting for my voice. I was always making sure I wasn't the first one to be hurt in the playground, which normally I was. So the business life to me, and it came naturally, and I believe I'm attributing this to the way I was brought up.
Okay. Oh, that's very interesting. How many boys are there?
I have two older brothers, and my family is all boys, and I married family, and both sides of the family only had boys. So
okay, there you go.
only have grandparents, only have grandboys. So it's interesting dynamics.
Yeah, that's right. You learned it from the ground up, as we say.
Yes, I think so too, Astrid.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, we'll start with our first question. So what inspired you for this role when you got here?
For the role I'm in, or for the role I'm doing now, or
business life we sort of talked about, but yeah.
Yes, look, I am involved with education. I'm involved with international education in particular. I was an international student myself. I arrived in Australia in 1996 to study English, and then I've done my degree here, and then it became a love story, and I'm here years later. So I am very passionate about education. I do believe everything starts with education. You know, if we can transform someone's life through education, that has an impact through generations. So I've done many roles within the international education sector, and I have been on a leadership role for over 10 years now. But what inspired me was my passion for education and my belief that every day we are making a fundamental difference in someone's lives.
Yeah, very true, very true. And did you experience any challenges to sort of get there into sort of a high level position like that?
Well, I did experience. I did experience many challenges but when I look back, I look at those challenges. The biggest challenge was myself.
Oh,
because of my confidence. I'm in international education. English is not my first language. How can I do that? How can I go and work and manage a group of 50 English language teachers?
Oh yeah.
So that was very challenge to me, like coming to terms with my confidence that I could do it. And the way I did it was owning it. There is a lot of power in vulnerability. So truly connecting to, making the human connections. Using an example, when I had my first GM role in an English language school, I used to be very, very nervous in writing emails to all the teachers because how about if I made a mistake? So one day I started a memo and say, "Good morning, teachers. I know you're all judging my grammar today, but what I'd like to say is blah." So we just broke the ice, and they just. So I owned my fears and I made myself publicly vulnerable. Then through that, I created human connections.
Yeah, that's an important hint also for people, and it's certainly a struggle that I have too around the English language, and having it back to front sometimes. And sometimes I'm just also assertive about it, and I say, well, look, it's my second language, so that's just what it is. Yeah, wonderful. So, what did you think were some of the enablers? What sort of supported you to get there?
Look, I think enablers is obviously. I look back on it. I said, is it luck or did I create my path? I always asked questions. I always asked for help. So I met wonderful people along the way, men and women, that became my mentors in the process. So I work in education. So this is a people's industries. So a lot of my enablers were people that I met along the way and helped me and gave me the time. So if there is any tips here for young women, for immigrant women, look for help. Put your hands up. Look at people because what I learned, and I do a lot of mentoring now, you get as much pleasure out of this in helping out someone. So try to connect to people that are like-minded and try to draw those experiences through them. So my biggest enablers were certainly the people I met along the way. But it didn't happen by accident. I did went after them, sort of
yeah,
a speak.
okay. Without having like formal arrangements necessarily.
Well, I think there was formal arrangements,
All right,
but
okay.
the formal arrangements, they came afterwards. They
All
came
right.
after, in the terms, I would like this to happen. I am willing, I like the way you conduct yourself at work. Would you be able to have a one-to-one with me that I could bounce ideas with you on a fortnightly basis, for example? But in many cases, those formal agreements, they came at the back of me initiating a request.
Oh yeah, so you targeted the people that you thought would be most useful to you.
Exactly, I did.
Exactly, yeah.
I did target those people,
that's
and I still do.
Yeah, that's a great strategy, really. And you said before that you know, that's what you would recommend to young women.
Yes, I think there is. I always get asked this question, Astrid. What would you recommend for immigrant women or young women that want to get into business life? I came across a very interesting podcast a few months ago, saying how to stop promoting incompetent men by a man called Thomas Shamuro Prezumic. I'm probably mispronouncing.
I've heard the question before.
Yes, yeah. I'm probably mispronouncing his name. But one of the points that he raises that I think it's very interesting is women, us. We always are over this paradox, you know, that we are trapped in this paradox. If we lean in too much, we perceive to be too aggressive. If we don't, if we don't lean in, we are not strong enough. We don't have the traces to be a competent leader. But I think if anything I live by and I talk to young women about is stats proves that an effective leader, not a competent leader, an effective leader has the traces, has strong female traces, which is empathy, self-awareness, humility, emotional intelligence, coachability. So let's own our traces. Let's put those traces into practice in our workplace and not trying to be too aggressive, too competitive, blow my own trumpets all the time so I can be perceived as being competent. I think we need to look at stats as saying and own our own leadership traces because they are effective.
Yes, and we've just seen that in COVID with the women leaders, haven't we?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So that leads. That's a nice lead to the next question. Did you yourself experience some gender-based discrimination, or particularly probably in the government area might have occurred? Because in the education sector, maybe not so much, because like you said, you work with people.
Look, that question is an interesting one because in the education sector, my sector is mostly women.
Yeah, exactly.
Having said that, I'm part of the Lead 50/50, which is a women's movement on the international education sector. Because yes, most of this sector is females, but the top management, boards, executives, teams, still very male heavy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, but answering your question, so we are advocating for a more diverse gender or gender equality on the top management on boards. But I am a big advocated for the diversity. Not only in terms of gender, but in terms of background, in terms of qualification, in terms of sexual orientation. We need to look at a more diverse group and push the agenda beyond gender.
Yeah. And also the diversity is in culture, isn't it?
Yeah. And when answering your question, Gisele, have you felt any discrimination in terms of gender? In terms of gender, no, but I had in terms of culture.
Yeah.
I have been in situations in the beginning of my career that I couldn't express myself as effectively as a native speaker. And because of that, I was giving less floor audience, or what I had to say was brushed because it needed to be said in a more precise way. So that stayed with me. But that pushed me to work harder and say, next time I will be more to the point. I will study more what I want to say. So that discrimination came from the point of background, not so much gender.
Any parting last messages to, particularly in this case, migrants and refugees or other marginalized groups that, would like to advance through business or advance through public life?
To own your own leadership skills and do not make excuses for who you are.
Back to you, Juliana.
Mute myself. Okay. Thank you very much, Najiba. That was great. Thank you, Astrid. That was a lovely interview. So, Najiba, could you please bring us your reflection?
Yeah, sure. Again, I think when we talk about, for me, I tend to see that there are common trends when we talk about barriers. We know that there are many barriers to the participation of women. She talked about her level of education. Sometimes the presence of children can affect, the way we can participate in workforce. But more importantly, I think some of these barriers are compounded by additional factors like, language skills, which Giselle was referring to, and for me, I could resonate, coming from a country like Afghanistan, where I have hardly had access to education, the level of education that I could bring with me to Australia, that previous qualification could become another additional barrier, to my acceptance, in public life, or to my involvement into, local work. So I think there are additional barriers when we talk about, women entering into a workforce or starting a business, because there are factors like language skills, qualification that you can bring from home, amount of the local work experience, or local levels of discrimination and the ability to work are some of the trends that I think many women face. But again, this becomes much more stronger for marginalized, culturally diverse women in any country, in any part of the world. And so I would leave it there.
Thank you. Astrid?
Well, she was a very inspiring woman to interview. And I liked how she talked about the traits and owning our own space rather than trying to fit in a world that is there. Why don't we create our own world and our own path and own who we are, lock, stock and barrel, and develop our own traits that we can bring to the situation and to leadership. I thought that was a really, really strong message that she brought there. And not to be embarrassed about our language or speech or what we look like or anything like that, but actually saying, this is me and I'm here and I'm contributing and I will get there. I thought that was really, really inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. My reflection reminded me of a quote from a person years and years ago in my country of birth, who has been quoted around the world. Educate a man and you educate an individual. educate a woman and you educate a nation. And I think Giselle, for me, brought this to light, that education is extremely important. And that is what we would encourage more and more young people to aspire to getting education, because that then strengthens your voice. It doesn't matter the language you use, but so long as you got that education, you'll be able to use this as a tool to articulate. Where I come from, it is about education all the way. Thank you very much. Astrid, I liked that interview. Now, Najiba, we will need to move on, and we need to move on to MP Caris Milan. So I'll give her bio. Caris Milan MP was first elected to the Queensland Parliament as a state member for Jordan in 2017. So she's quite new to the Parliament. This follows a career over 20 years in public and private sector, providing strategic advice and support in government affairs, policy and advocacy, stakeholder engagement and communication strategy. She worked across a number of industries, including planning and development, transport, infrastructure, mining, tourism, and telecommunications. Caris has previously held positions on a number of boards, including government and superannuation. She's currently the Assistant Minister for Treasury. And you interviewed her, Najiba. Thank you for the interview.
My first question is that, you have served on local government for almost 4 to 5 years, which was an entry to your public life. We really wanted to hear from you. What made you enter public life? Is there a particular experience or incident that inspired or challenged you to consider a role in public life?
So there was. So I've been involved in politics for, at that time, around 25 years. But I really didn't think that I would ever enter public life. But there were a couple of moments in my life. And the first one's a really predictable one, and I'm sure it's actually influenced a number of women. But it was when Donald Trump was elected as the president of the United States. And it was a little bit of a shock to me that someone who was very obvious in terms of some of the racist things and the sexist things that he was saying, could then reach the heights of being the leader of the United States of America. At the time of his election, I have 2 daughters, and I remember thinking to myself, goodness, I don't want this to be what they believe is leadership. And I come from a Greek background, and so that was really important to me to show them a different form of leadership. So that was probably the first time that I really thought, you know what, I need to step up and really move into some form of public life and some form of leadership position. The second thing that I guess guided me was actually more personal, and I think it's something that many women face, particularly those who have children, and that was, how would I do this if I was to do it? But my husband, I came home one night, I'd been working late, helping some people, and he said to me, what are you doing? And I said, sorry, and he said, you're so busy getting everyone else elected. When are you going to get yourself elected? And that to me was an actual indication that I was going to get the support that I needed as a woman, with a very supportive partner that I have in my husband, to be able to do this. Because as I said, I've got children, I've got elderly parents. It's not an easy thing to take on, but that was kind of, I guess, that the point at which I thought, you know what, maybe I could do this.
We've heard you already speaking of some of the barriers, but it would be good to hear more in detail. What were some of the barriers, either individually and as you just mentioned about your personal life, to public life that you faced? And what are the challenges women from marginalized communities face, in your opinion, as well?
Yeah, so I think that women tend to, and this is something I worked out, I think women want to be perfect at something before they put themselves forward. They want to know that they can do it, 100% well. And what I've learned over my time, whether it was in my work or whether it's in public life, is that men don't do that. Men don't necessarily wait for those opportunities to come to them. They just go for them. And then if they're not 100% great at it, it doesn't matter. They'll learn on the job. So that's something that I think is been a barrier to me, because I remember, thinking, oh no, I'm not good enough for this role, or I'm not ready to step forward into this role. But as I've gone through my life of work and things that I've done politically, I've worked out that there is never a good time. There's only an opportunity to sort of jump in and say yes to opportunities. And what you normally find is you're actually pretty good at it, and you're doing okay. So I think that's something that I think many women face as a bit of a barrier. They put a sort of stop on themselves as something to do. Obviously, yeah, as I mentioned, your personal life, particularly as a woman, which, it tends to be much busier because, whether you have a family or whether you're working or you have parents that you need to support, all of those things I think come into it as well. So I think there's sometimes a bit of a barrier as well. And also I think politically too, men tend to put themselves forward in political positions more so than women. And so as a result, we were finding that women weren't taking up those opportunities. And what you see then is just a parliament of men. So I think that some of the things that we've done in terms of that have been really important. I think particularly for marginalised women, one of the things, particularly coming from a background, a multicultural background, is I think language is sometimes really difficult for women, and understanding nuances and that sort of side of it can be, I think, a little bit of a challenge as well. When I was younger, I didn't speak English. It's a personal experience that carries me through. And so I'm really conscious of that when I meet people, and maybe they'll apologise to me if they can't speak very well. But to me, it doesn't matter. I get it. I get the gist of it. But I think that can be a particular barrier, particularly for women of migrant and minority backgrounds as well.
So one of the 12 critical areas of the Beijing Platform for Action is institutional mechanisms for the advancement of women. So again, in your opinion and in your career, what do you think the public policies or structural decisions have been enabled for you to enter public life? Is there any specific quotes or examples that you would like to use?
Yeah. One of the things here in Queensland that we're very fortunate to have is we have a dedicated Minister for Women, which is really important. And we also do a lot of reporting, statistical reporting on how women and men fare, in our state. And a key element of that is that we have a women on boards policy where we actually stipulate that on all government boards, 50% will be women. And that was really important because I was actually able to be on a government board for a period of time. Such an incredible learning experience for me. But I'm not sure I would have had that opportunity if there wasn't that mechanism there to actually push me forward and to be able to take that role on. So I think that there are those sort of things that I think can help. Politically, within my political party, which is the Australian Labor Party, we spent 20 years debating it, but we got there to have what are called affirmative action quotas. And what that means is that we have recognised that it isn't about a token woman being offered a political seat. What it's saying is that there are many women out there who deserve it, but they need that additional assistance to get there. And so we've now got a rule within our state that parliaments must have 40% of, like our parliament, side of parliament must have 40% of women. That goes up to 45% in 2022 and 50% in 2025. And I think that was very helpful for me as well when I was first running for a seat of parliament, because it was recognised that I would make up that 40% of women in our side of parliament. And it's working really, really well. And, people do say, oh, you're just getting it because you're a woman. No, I think what it's saying is that, you are good enough. Here is a mechanism to help you. But I think it also means that you get better quality male candidates because they have less seats that they have access to. So therefore quality rises. And I think that makes a better parliament for everyone.
Definitely, definitely. So how, I mean, we've spoken about, enablers, we spoke about barriers, and the policy is different from those that that you've been able to work on in Australia. But I guess my question is that, how are all these barriers and policies and enablers are different from those that the country you have grown up? And you just mentioned you're from a Greek background. Do you see any differences? Is it easier here, or do you think that it's much easier for women in your own country to be working within this into a public forum?
Yeah, look, I think Greece has come a long way. I think that, they were a very traditional type of country where women had a very set role, which was to be the caretaker, which was to be at home. But I think that certainly has changed. I lived in Greece when I was quite young, so it was a little bit difficult to really experience it at that level. But I do recall something that happened when I was living. So we lived in Greece in the 70s. It was at a time when there was still a military government in Greece. And my mother, and so my family moved from Australia to Greece, but my mother had grown up in Australia, and politically there was a freedom around politics. And I recall this because I remember the conversation. She was asking some of her friends, who are you going to vote for in the upcoming election? And they all shushed her and said, no, we don't talk about those things. So there was a real lack of political freedom, I think, for a period of time. And I think that that's something that obviously is a barrier in many countries around the world, that people don't have the capacity to communicate freely about their political ideas, their political wishes, and I think that that's particularly dangerous. But that's certainly something that I recall, even as a young child. I think I must have been 7, but I remember overhearing that conversation and my mum feeling quite confused because, she'd grown up in Australia where people quite actively talked about, well, I'm voting for this party or I'm voting for this person, and it was never an issue. But over there, it was really regarded as you don't talk about it, because obviously there were repercussions for talking about those kind of political beliefs.
What advice would you give to young migrant and refugee women who would like to enter the public life? Do you have a message to the next generation of women from culturally diverse communities who are marginalized?
So my first bit of advice, which I actually give all young women, regardless of their status, but all young women, but certainly I think it really applies to young women of migrant and marginalised backgrounds, is just say yes. So if an opportunity comes up, just say yes. Don't say no. Don't think about it too much. Say yes, because I can guarantee that you will be okay. You will get there. I think that that's really important for young women who are interested in joining public life and potentially being a member of parliament or working at a local council or federal parliament. I think that I feel that, for the most part, you do need to be part of a political party. I think it's really, it's important because you learn a lot through that time, but you learn a lot about how politics works in Australia, and I think that's really important. I'm very fortunate in that I get to meet a lot of young women within our political party, and I take on, I guess, a two-prong role, and this is the other thing I would encourage young women to think about. I get a lot of young women who say, oh, can you be my mentor? And I'm always happy to give advice and offer suggestions, but I think mentorship is one of those things that is quite personal. I think you get to know someone very well, and then you can offer them the advice based on their individual circumstances. So if you can find someone like that in your life as a young woman who can help you and give you that advice, that honest feedback, because sometimes it has to be honest to say, you should do this or you should do that. But the other part is what I call sponsorship, and that's a little bit different to mentorship, because what that is having people in your life who will push you forward for opportunities, who will actually ring someone for you and say, I think this young woman would be perfect for this role. And I think those are things that, are really important, I think, for young women in particular, because they aren't always as confident. And I certainly wasn't at when I was younger. But what I did have very clearly is I had mentors, people I could turn to and ask for advice.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that interview, Najiba. So I will start with Astrid this time for your reflection, Astrid. The trend is coming through, but we want to hear from you. You are muted.
Yeah, certainly the trend is coming through around the quota and affirmative actions and so on. But I also thought what came out strongly and not unusual, but good to name, is the complexity of women's lives sometimes, and that default position of being in a caring roles, either with your own children or with your own parents, and still carrying that sort of responsibility, sort of jointly, but still being the major sort of provider of that, and how it affects how you can get involved into life and public life and juggle it all. And so I think that that's still an important thing. And the other thing that she said is that imposter syndrome, that we're thinking we need to be able to have 100% of the evidence that we can do it, rather than just launching ourselves into it with confidence that we're going to work it out. And the other thing I really liked when she was talking about the enablers and the system kind of things, is also that you can do it. You look at how to get involved, and you get involved, lock, stock and barrel. And yeah, and that takes a lot of courage, but you can get there. So I thought it was a very strong message. Thank you.
Thank you, Astrid. Yes, thank you. And Najiba.
Yeah, I think a few things stood out for me. One is that, how sometimes our males, our men and brothers and husbands can play an important role in supporting you at early stage of leadership. And I think for Mrs. Mullen, her husband actually encouraging her to actually step into a public life role, I think have had definitely a significant impact in thinking and understanding, that the responsibilities could be shared, and she could enter into a field that she is supported, and again, the role of male champions in women leadership can become so important when we talk about women participation in public life. And at the same time, I think it goes back to what Astrid was saying. I hear in both politicians, Mrs. Mullen and also Mrs. Maria, is that, you should never doubt yourself. I think we've also heard it from Giselle that, I think the kind of first barrier that women and girls tend to face is those self-doubts, those self-talks, and which continuously comes to you, whether you're entering into a workforce, whether you're entering into a parliament, that whether can you do it, you start doubting yourself. So I think it's about, you should never doubt yourself, that you're and you should actually believe that you are valuable and powerful and deserving of every chance and opportunity in the world to pursue and achieve your dream. That's what I really hear from Mrs. Mullen's interview. And I think what we can see again from all the interviews is that success is really built on the foundation that, courage, hard work, and, individual responsibility is there, despite what some of us, would have believe in success. It's not really built on resentment and fear, and we need to, combat those emotions and take the risks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Najiba. I would like to reflect again on language. So Giselle talked about how language can be a barrier and how you need to push through regardless of the fact that you don't have the level of language that people think that you need in public life. And the fact that Mrs. Millen said language was difficult for migrant and refugee women. And we know that the first thing the migrant and refugee women talk about in Australia as a barrier is the lack of English language, and as a limitation for women in putting themselves forward. So I reflect on that and reflect on my own journey in Australia in supporting especially refugee women from African countries. And I knew that a lot of the refugee women who had come from African countries had been leaders in the refugee camps, had been leaders in their own communities prior to becoming refugees and going into the camps. And in my mind was, how are we going to enable these leaders to really enter into what they used to be prior to arrival as refugees to Australia? That is what led us to set up African Women Australia, to train women into understanding the Australian system and to actually put them in a place where they had the confidence to access sponsorship, which Mrs. Mullen talked about. And I loved the point that she talked about sponsorship, because it's not everybody who can be a mentor or who wants to be a mentor, because of that intense relationship and intense requirement of time and energy in getting to know a person and working with them. But to be a sponsor is so easy, because you technically are a door opener. You are a door opener. You tap somebody on the shoulder, and you bring them together and you walk away, and they get on with what they need to do. So I think for me, it's been an interesting one, but also the one that she was so clear on identifying and articulating the institutional mechanisms for enabling women. And she talked about women on board policy in Queensland. And that, I think, is quite a powerful policy that can be held on and can be used across Australia and across the world, really, as one that helps women into public life as well. So that's been interesting so far. We have one more interview to do, and I will introduce Esther Pascadilidis-Shilas. Esther is a social worker from Sydney, Australia. She's a long-established community leader and has previously held office in local government. She has a passion for the development, mentoring, and support of women from diverse backgrounds in leadership. So our organizations and institutions are representative of people they are established to serve. Her passions include community building, multicultural affairs, politics, and she's curious about people and cultures from around the world. So thanks, Najiba. Let's introduce Esther's interview. So tell me, what made you enter public life?
It's a really good question, Juliana. I guess, you know, as a child of post-war migrants to Australia, I saw, I guess, a lot of decisions being made that affected everyday people, but they weren't necessarily decisions that were informed by the experience of everyday people.
Yeah.
And I saw that a lot growing up. And I also grew up in a family that was very community-minded. And I guess, you know, they were leaders in their community, particularly my dad. And I guess, you know, I always had this affinity, you know, to community, an affinity to working alongside other people and being in service.
Yeah.
And then I did a social work degree, which, you know, cemented that when I was quite young. I went into uni straight after high school. So I guess, Juliana, a confluence of personal experience and then my education and, you know, an amazing set of mentors who encouraged me along the way, that they're kind of the range of influences that got me there. I guess it wasn't one single thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but if I told you, Esther, if I asked you to pick up on a particular experience or a particular incident that inspired or challenged you to consider public role, would you have one?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think, you know, I observed, you know, as the CEO of a migrant resource centre back in the late 90s, I observed, I observed people's behaviour in public life up close, and that was, you know, from local government to state government to federal government. And some of that behaviour I didn't feel was befitting for the roles that people held. And I felt that they weren't listening to the needs of the community, and I didn't feel that they were responding in an equitable way. So I guess having seen that and having seen how power could be used for good and not for good, I think that observation and that experience probably did actually force me to consider what role I might be able to play in shifting some of that.
That sounds fantastic, Esther. What are what were some of the barriers, individual or institutional or personal barriers to public life that you faced?
Oh, wow. Okay. There's lots of barriers. It's a really good question. I think if I take the individual first, it's I guess from within yourself, believing that you can do it, and believing that you have a right to exercise power in a public way, and really, you know, a lot of the process that you go through is about coming from within and understanding that, you know, that everybody has a right to participate in a meaningful way, whatever that role is going to be. So I think coming from within first. I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy, where we'll, like, you know, double back and have another think and sort of convince ourselves that maybe we shouldn't, or you know, somebody else might be better suited. That kind of narrative that sometimes goes on in our heads. I think that forms a barrier in of itself, your own thinking.
Yeah.
I think the institutional barriers are just so, you know, some of them are so, I guess, not as obvious, and they might be quite systemic. And I guess what I had to counter was, you know, established relationships. I had to understand, you know, what those relationships meant. I had to get to know people that, you know, might not have known me very well, or I didn't know very well, and have honest and frank conversations with them about what I felt I could contribute. So you really have to put yourself out there and have other people judge whether they think that you are fit for that.
Yeah.
And some of those people may or may not have your interests at heart. So there's also, you know, established power structures.
The document that we are working with is the Beijing Platform for Action and the SDGs. In that platform, there are 12 critical areas. And one of those critical areas, it says institutional mechanisms for the advancement of women. I love that. But then I want to ask you, because you have been in public life, what public policies or structural decisions have been enablers for you to enter public life?
Well, I think I have benefited from, you know, civil libertarians and feminists and people who have called out inequality in this country. I've been a beneficiary of those people before me. And that's made all the difference, because if I was of my mother's generation, it would have been far less possible for me to enter public life. So there's obviously decisions that have been made along the way that have improved my opportunity. But what concerns me is, I guess, that it's okay to put those policies in place, but what you see at play is that, you know, for example, in my situation, once I held public office in local government, you're kind of on your own, Juliana. You know, the system doesn't have, you know, structured kind of, you know, mentoring or, you know, sort of regular check-ins with people that have more experience. You're really counting on your own networks, your own connections, your own experience and intelligence, and, you know, the kind of networks that you create and others help you create. Yeah. And I was very fortunate that because I came into it later in life, I had an established network of people, and those people, in the most part, they were women. You know, some were political women and some weren't. They helped me. They helped me in very difficult times. They helped me even with my campaigns, because I had to run an internal campaign to get on the local government ticket, and then I had to run a public campaign, and I'd never done anything like that before back in 2012, 8 years ago now. So, you know, it doesn't. So while the policies have shifted, sometimes the practices and the unspoken rules, they don't always support, you know, the right kind of people or a diversity of people to get into public life. And you know, a lot of it is about some people having power and not using it well, and the wrong people, not always the right people wanting power. So, I think it's what happens. So you're in, let's assume you're in and you've got a role and you're, a mayor or you're an MP, whatever it is. It's also about what happens after you hold that role. What kind of guidance you get, what kind of advice you get, people supporting you along the way, you supporting other people coming through, particularly women, forming coalitions of women. That happens very informally. It doesn't happen formally at all. So it's really hard if you're a first time, particularly in local government. There's a lot of women over the years who talk about their experience in local government in the same way as me and say, once I got there, I was kind of on my own, and you just sort of, intuitively you feel your way, and you hope you're making the best possible decisions, but you haven't really got a frame of reference. So that can be challenging, Juliana. Mm-hmm.
The fourth question I have for you, Esther, is about mentoring. You've mentioned it a couple of times, and I just want to know, did you have specific mentors on this journey who acted as enablers, and in what way?
Yeah, I did indeed. I've still got a mentor that I've had since I was 20. She was my social work supervisor in my last social work placement, and I got my first job with her help. And she doesn't see herself as a mentor. She always laughs when I say that. But she is still a mentor, and she's still a person I call on, to be a referee, to have lunch with, and try and sort of, when I need to reconnect with my core values and my mission, and sort of try and stay aligned to my vision for what I want to do. I always call on her. And then there's other women and men along the way that have, been able to give you, honest feedback and guidance. I've got two amazing women who have got, political lives, and they really mentored me through my experience in local government. And I probably would have made some decisions that might not have been good decisions if it wasn't for that advice.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's really, really important. I think it's really important.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you, Esther. My last question. My last question. What advice would you give to a young migrant or refugee woman who would like to enter public life? And so that's first part of that question. What advice would you like to give to a young migrant or refugee woman who would like to enter public life?
Oh, I think it's, believe in yourself, be clear about your motivations, drive what you want to achieve with a great passion, but have a balance in your life. What I've learned over the years is that probably my life was a little bit skewed towards public life and community life, away from myself and my own joys. So I think, having a balance in our lives, but actually like chasing our dreams with great passion and gusto and believing in ourselves. I also think, finding other people, particularly other women who might be older or have more experience or have a different kind of experience. It doesn't matter if they're not the same background as you or they don't have the same interests as you, but if they have an interest in you and you're curious about their experience, hang on to those people, be open to learning from them and, learning from their journey. But at the end of the day, it's your journey, right? So you can take a whole lot of things from other people, but it's your journey and you have to shape it according to your own needs and what you want to achieve. So, I would say back yourself, believe in yourself, find other like-minded people. You can't do anything alone. You've got to work with other people. It's the only way to get good work done. And also be a good listener and have the capacity to self-reflect. And, if something's not working, have the courage to walk away from it. If it's not working for you and you're not doing your best work and you're not your best self, walk away from it and find the thing that does give you that.
That's amazing. Thank you, Esther. The last question, do you have a message for the next generation of women from culturally diverse communities who are marginalized?
My message would be, we need you. We need your voices. We need your ideas. We need your thoughts. You are Australia. You're in Australia. Australia is yours. This is your Australia. It's not a country that's somebody else's. It's your country. It's our country. We want to hear from you. We want you involved. We want your voices heard and your thoughts represented.
Well, there you go. Thank you very much, Esther. Astrid, I think I'm starting with you, with our friend Esther.
Okay. For me, what particular? Oh, hang on. Am I? Yeah.
Yes.
What particularly stuck out is that formal and informal. So we are, you know, collectively, I guess, working on systems and working on change. And I know this week were the language negotiations, you know, the formal sort of side of things, but it doesn't end there. We need to have that support for each other, and we need to think how we guiding people through. And particularly in a political process, it's a very complicated process, and power plays such an important role. And in Australia, we certainly often call it power games. There's a lot of maneuvering, toing and froing, and it's not necessarily something that we've learned from young, particularly as women. You know, the research shows that we're more on the nurturing side or more of the collaborative team kind of side. And in politics, it doesn't quite work that way. So you really have to build that informal support, and political parties actually need to think about how they're supporting their women to thrive once they're there. So it doesn't end with getting there. And I think that is a very powerful message in what Esther was talking about, I feel. Yeah.
Yes, Astrid, thank you. The message is, it does not end with getting there. It's about how you survive and thrive once you are there. That's a very powerful message. Thank you, Astrid. Najiba, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, again, mentors came up in this conversation as well. I think a woman needs mentors because we need support to stand in our powers. I think mentors provide a mirror of our strength and offer guidance towards creating the future that we really want. And I think it's not only having, you know, a mentor or a support or connection for a period of time, but even women who are standing in leadership positions, as we heard from Esther, you know, they need that continuous, ongoing, support and connection and guidance and mentoring, even though they have started their leadership journey, even though they have already sitting in, local, state or federal political positions. So people need to support, especially woman to woman support, you know, along the way. And I see that, you know, mentoring has been an effective and increasingly a popular way to promote women's training and professional development, to support the implementation of women's empowerment.
Thank you, Najiba. Great. I picked up very similar sentiment from Esther as was with Giselle. And that was the issue of self-belief and self-talk. So that got me thinking about another quote that I have come across and have positioned it on my wall in my office. And it's a quote that says, "The only thing preventing you achieving what you want to achieve is or are the stories that you tell yourself." And I think what has come through from listening to all the speakers is to be able to manage your self-talk and to be able to manage your self-belief, because men do it. They believe in themselves. Whatever difficulty, whatever mountain they go, I will scale it, and they go and scale it. But as women want to tick the boxes before we do that. So that was a very strong, powerful message there. But also what came in through painfully was the isolation and the struggling through, and Astrid has picked up on that as well. and the great need to form coalitions. And as she has said, and I want to reinforce that, it's not about leaving the individual to go and form their coalitions. There should be support whilst in office to be able to enter into those spaces in and out of several coalitions to be able to survive in that space. So I think it was very clear, and I love her message to the young people, that Australia needs us. Australia needs all of us. So thank you for all our interviewees. You brought a rich kind of information to our panel. I will hand it back to Astrid for questions.
Yeah, so thank you, Juliana. That's been really interesting panel and beautiful films, and there's certainly some trends there that people can pick up on. We have received a question, and the question is how minority women can compete in leadership in a political field, especially in Asia. Najiba, do you want to start with responding to this question?
Yeah.
Oh, you just dropped out. You're on mute, actually.
Oh, great.
Oh, there you go.
Right. What I see, I think what's important, not only from hearing, all the interviewees speaking, I think it's quite important when we talk about a woman not only competing but entering into leadership and political field, is to address women leadership's challenges and needed competencies. We really need to ensure that female leaders have the experiences and the resources to learn what they need most. And secondly, I think it's quite important to leverage the power of choosing, which again, we heard it a couple of times throughout today. And thirdly, for me, I think rethinking the system and challenging assumptions is another important thing that we can consider when we talk about promoting women leadership positions. And probably the two last things that I could think quickly is that, sometimes it's good to consider a woman-only leadership development experience, and ways of improving that. And lastly, I think creating the right networks, as it can also help you, in your leadership journey.
Oh, thank you, Najiba. Juliana?
Yes, Astrid, I've been thinking about that question a little bit. And I think I want to talk about the fact that everybody is a leader. There are no born leaders. Everybody has something to contribute. If we look at leadership as our contribution to society, then everybody has something to contribute. So it comes back to the points that we've picked up from the interviewees, the point about self-belief. If you know that you have something to contribute, then it's important to look at the areas in which you can contribute. And Esther said something that was powerful. She said, clarify your motivations. Why are you doing it? Why are you going into that space? So if we are able to clarify our motivations, and I'll always say to groups of women of minority groups that I work with, that it's not about you and what you will get out of it. If you go into community development, if you go into leadership, thinking that you're going to do it for something to achieve whatever it is within yourself, don't bother. Because at the end of the day, it's about the community, it's about the government, it's about the society. Once you make that your focus, once you make that your motivation, a whole lot of things will fall in place for you as an individual. So I think one of the things that I'm very strong about, and I think I want to see it happen more and more for migrant women, is the ability to believe that whoever we are, even when we walk into a place like Australia as a migrant or refugee woman, we've got something to contribute. Whether we are asked to be, we are told we are needed or not, doesn't matter. As a person, you've got something to contribute. So once you come and enter the society, you look for the places where you can contribute. And then whilst you're at it, you seek knowledge. you seek understanding. Why do I say that? If you don't know how it works, how do you do it? How do you find your methodology? So it's important to seek knowledge and understanding. And that is why I think we need to really invest in training women, training refugee and migrant women into understanding the system and also providing opportunities for them to be able to access the system. I believe in women on boards. I believe that it's really important that we create more and more of opportunities for women from migrant and refugee communities to access women on board. Those opportunities and training opportunities available there so that they can find a way into public life, if you like. Women are doing well as entrepreneurs, but we want to push women into decision making, because when you're at the table, then you can bring your people with you to that conversation. But when you are locked out of the room, how are you able to bring the voices of your people to that table? So I really want to advocate for more and more spaces for migrant and refugee women on women on boards.
Thank you. My response to the question, to add to you two, because you've covered it, of course, wonderfully, is also for you, Raji, to actually map where you would like to be and look at who could be a role model for you, who you would be aspiring to, which party they're in, which processes they have used, which way they could potentially support you. But if you are very clear in your end goal and then step it down to intermediate goals, which might start with the knowledge and mapping exactly who is who and how it's all working, then you can step by step, you can get there. But it does take that sort of work to be clear where you want to be, and then work out what might be the best way to get there. And then be very strategic about how you're going to do it and who you're going to approach, who you're going to work with, what membership you're going to take on, and that sort of thing. Just at a very, very, very practical sort of level. Yeah. Okay, I think we've heard so much, and I think we'll wrap it up here. We heard a lot about mentorship. You heard about the support needed and the self-belief that we need to have. But one thing that I wanted to bring up, what also stuck out for me was a quote from Charis Mullen saying, "The talent is out there. You know, we have to create the opportunities to harness the talent and the systems, whether that be by quota or targets or leadership programs, but we have a responsibility to create those systems. It's not like men would like to say, or those in power would like to say, oh, it's merit-based, they have to compete, and if they're better, they get it. No, we're not facilitating to harness that talent. The talent is there. And I think that is a very, very strong message. So for the leaders out there who are in a formal leadership position, it's your responsibility to make that happen. It's your responsibility to create systems for women to come through. And those who are not in a formal leadership position yet, you are here at CSW. This is a very important step, because you hear from other women that are on their path to getting there to change, to getting there to empowerment. And you can build knowledge, networks, you have research that comes through, you have an understanding, or create an understanding in yourself where your passion is, which is the direction that you want to take. So you're actually at the very front line of getting there. I have every confidence that all of you will achieve your goals. So my last message in that is, of course, I wish you a wonderful day, but I also think as women, stay proud, stay together, and support each other. On that note, have a great day. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.